There we are. Now we got something going on,
There
right?
we
We're
are. Now
recording.
we're
Hey,
live. Yay.
fantastic. We are here and we're recording, people. It's the Sustainiacs. Thank you for downloading, watching, tuning in, wherever you guys are doing. I'm the Sustainiac every time. I'm Michael Vincent. He's Peter Bryant. He's the guest Sustainiac. And once you hear him talk, you're going to understand why you should listen to him because, Americans are infatuated with this accent. And for some reason, if you just speak in one, somehow your IQ level goes up. Is that a phenomenon or is it actually true, Peter?
Michael, I'd like to say, it's true on both counts. It's both a phenomenon and a fact as well. So, but we'll find
Oh,
out by
wow.
the end of
Okay.
this podcast, huh? And thank you for having me on your podcast. Really delighted to be talking about a pretty critical subject.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, you've done a lot of things and you're doing a lot of things, right? And I mean, you're educated from across the pond, I see, right? And
Yep,
from on this side of the pond as well, right? Kellogg
exactly.
at Northwestern, which is a pretty decent school last I checked. And
Yeah, last
well,
time we
we
checked,
want to talk
still.
about energy and mining. You are an energy and mining person, and those are both huge things within sustainability, right? ESG, really,
Totally.
when you take it in globally. And, there's a lot of hype around those sectors and the products and advancements in technologies that depend on those sectors that are, and the hype is both true and false, right? I mean,
Sure.
it's right with headline porn, if you ask me, right?
Yeah.
What I call headline porn. People think, oh, this, therefore it's bad, or oh, this, therefore it's good. Let's break all that down. My friend, who are you?
So, Michael, I have a number of hats that I wear, but relevant for this discussion are probably four hats, actually, would you believe? So, very quickly, board chair of Clareo. We're a boutique strategy consulting firm providing expert advice across the mining and energy sector, and that's both to the public and private sector globally, and gives us a unique perspective on the energy transition and the entire energy value chain. I'm also a co founder of a non-profit, the Development Partners Institute, which works on improving social economic outcomes for First Nations, actually, around resource projects, and that's across North America, Latin America, Africa. And I sit
Wow.
on the board
Okay.
of several startups and venture funds that focus on investing in startups in energy and mining. And finally, I'm leading a coalition of mining companies called an informal coalition in Washington, D.C., working with the U.S. government on aligning the U.S. government strategy around minerals.
Oh, fantastic. Okay,
Yeah.
right. So I mean, these are wow. We could like we'll do like 100 different episodes to try
We
and cover
could. We
all
could
that.
do a series on all this. Yeah, absolutely, Michael.
I mean, my brain is going nuts because I'm like I have a lot of curiosity. If I was a
Great.
cat, I'd have burned through my 9 lives a long time
Time
ago,
ago. Okay.
and I just went through about 700 different questions that I wanted to ask you just in that short intro.
No, it's fine.
So let's do it. I mean, most relevant here is board chair at is it Claro or Clareo?
Clareo, yeah, which is actually a play on the Latin word for clarity. So there you go.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So
So
leave it to you to not just play on words, but play on Latin words.
we're play on Latin words
So
exactly. Yeah, very, very
so
highbrow. And
you watched a lot of Monty Python growing up. I take it,
I
right?
did
Is that where
absolutely
you
one of my
got that?
favorites. Yeah. And Michael, to your point, I might
Absolutely.
actually say why we talked before we started. Why should people care about mining? Right. Like
Yeah,
why?
let's do
And
it.
its relevance to energy. And I think the critical thing is that the energy transition that's underway is we're actually moving from an energy system that's essentially fossil fuel intensive to a minerals intensive energy system. And I think
Yeah.
the
Okay.
realization of that is just starting to go on. The light bulb's starting to turn on in companies and governments, but there's not yet a full understanding, particularly in Western countries, what or are the implications and risks of actually what does that all mean to us. And I think there's huge issues. And one person was telling me today or yesterday, I was talking to them, an environmental person, that actually renewable energy is not green, which is an interesting provocation all by itself.
Yeah,
So
now listen, I have screamed that from the rooftops for years
yeah,
that renewable energy is not necessarily green. And in fact, fossil fuel energy is renewable. It just takes a long time.
no, yeah, no, absolutely. So I think what people don't realize is whether you looking at electric, EVs, whether it's cars, trucks, even hybrids, whether you're looking at solar power, wind power, batteries for storage, the intensity of minerals that goes into these technologies is massive compared to fossil fuel and internal combustion engine cars. It's quantums greater, and therefore the amount of minerals that need to be mined has to exponentially grow in the next 10, 15 years if we're to meet these goals that we've set ourselves. And I often talk about the minerals famine, that we're actually entering a minerals famine where particularly minerals that are critical, like copper and nickel, we're just not going to have enough, simply not going to have enough. And there's a kind of a fallacy that, we'll just recycle and substitute and we'll be fine. And that's just not true. That just shows a fundamental lack of understanding of the sector and the issues that we have. So we're on a pretty broad, aggressive move with a lot of our efforts to not only advise companies, but try and educate more broadly society and governments as to what this all means, and understand the risks, and therefore what should we be doing about it as well into the future. And then, as you say, mining and by implication everything else, cars, batteries, solar, wind. There are environmental and social issues around mining that also need to be understood.
Oh yeah, it's huge. And you and I spoke, I don't know, a number of weeks ago, right? You were basically making sure I was legitimate, and I was making sure you were legitimate.
Absolutely, yes. Sussing each other out.
Yeah, sniffing each other out, as it were. And you had spoken about the fact that copper, we're going to be out of copper. We don't have enough, right?
Yeah.
We don't even have enough now. And I was reading some articles, strangely enough, very quickly after, just a couple of days after that, and I believe it was like in South America is like the most productive copper mine somewhere in,
Yes.
in South America is one.
Yes.
And just to meet our goals for AI,
Yeah.
right? We would need 60 more of just that one mine, just for that one sector of demand for copper. There's no way we could possibly power our entire grid going down the EV route or whatever it happens to be. Like you said, we have a mineral shortage.
We're famine.
Mineral famine, and people don't realize that. And it's interesting too, as we change from fossil to other forms of energy.
Mm-hmm.
It would appear to me, and maybe this is wrong, and you can clear this up, but it appears to me that as the form of energy source has less energy within it to extract. Now, follow me here. It requires more minerals. Right, as like fossil fuel has the energy density to be an energy provider.
Yes.
Wind doesn't.
No.
Wind has no energy. You don't burn wind. In other words, you can't extract it from it. You can use it to create energy.
Correct.
And that's where you have to use the minerals, because it's the transfer of that energy and the storage of that energy that is the mineral rich issue, or the mineral intense part of it.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah. And and we're not talking, people think, the magnitude of what we're talking about. I mean, we're not talking about, pounds of copper. I mean, in solar and wind, we're talking about for a megawatt of power, tons of copper needed over, traditional methods of generation currently. If you're doing solar or offshore wind, it's significant. And I think what people don't realize that, as we enter a severe copper shortage or supply shortage, is Economics 101 says price goes up first. And today we're already seeing, the economics of projects, offshore wind and all that not working. And B, then if there's a shortage, where does the copper that is available go? To which markets, which countries, etc. So it puts severe risk and constraints on this transition that companies, I believe, and governments need to really fully understand so they can act upon them in a sensible way. So right now, we just don't understand it to the depth we need to. And by we, I mean the US, Europe, UK, kind of the Western world. So, and other parts of the world understand this better than we do. Trust me. So,
yeah, no, they do it's sad. It's one of the things that I'm not very proud of as being Americans. The fact that we're really behind in this movement, and I don't understand the resistance too much or where it comes from, other than it's useful in political wranglings, and that seems to be where that effort to refute certain things or lies, and it's a power hungry move. And unfortunately, we're not doing ourselves any services
No,
by doing that, along with legislation, right? I mean, EPR legislation, et cetera. By not having a national thing, we're really putting our businesses at a disadvantage when they're
no, we
operating
are.
internationally.
Absolutely, yeah. And
Um,
I think, and I get why, but there's this kind of in the US and Europe and UK, there's this kind of societal impression that's very anti-mining. And no doubt, the legacy of mining when we go back centuries is not great. People get flooded with images of children mining, cobalt in the Congo and the DRC.
mhm,
So it
that's right.
completely colors the thinking of society. So we have this dichotomy where people that fully support the energy transition on this in the next breath are anti-mining, and you go, well, hold on, you're actually anti the very thing that needs to supply the transition that you're pushing for. And I think that's that intellectual challenge. And mining is not as bad as it used to be. I mean, there are still challenges, and the industry is very assertive and aggressive in addressing environmental issues, around biodiversity, pollution, etc. The societal issues, particularly around First Nations and communities. And there's a lot of progress. There's more to be done without question, but we need to reconcile everything that's going on and sort of have a strategy to go forward. And right now we don't. We're very fragmented in terms of how we're thinking about it.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I like the angle that you're coming at from, or I like the position that you're in the companies and what you're involved in. I like your position within the argument of sustainability and mining, anti-mining, and energy transition, and all
Mm.
this type of thing. Because I contend that the Greta Thunbergs of the world and that ilk are not doing us any favor whatsoever. They're not
Mm.
even bringing issues to the light for us to have
No.
discussions, because there's nothing healthy about those discussions
Yeah.
that transpire once that light is brought in that type of manner.
Yeah.
And when I think about what you're doing there, if I were to classify what you're doing, you're pro energy, transition, because we have to do that. You're pro environmental, but you're also pro mining and energy resourcing, because,
Yeah.
and that's the right place to be, because we have to have that in order to have the transition. But let's do it in the right way. Is that a
Exactly.
fair clarification?
No, that is a fair
Yeah.
clarification. And I'll go back to an earlier point too, Michael, that you made around artificial intelligence. So I spoke at a gathering of artificial intelligence AI executives in Chicago 3 weeks ago. And we were talking about the minerals famine and the energy transition, and in fact, and the copper famine. So actually, it turned out, and everything else was about AI. It turned out the copper famine was the number one topic that they ranked as an aha moment, because they hadn't realized. I think they realized they use a lot of electricity, but they didn't realize how much electricity. So I think there was the CEO of AEP testified that a regular sized factory takes 100 megawatt of power, decent sized factory, which is about 100,000 homes. One data center uses 3 to 15 times that electricity. I mean, that's huge
Right.
electricity. And those companies
Right.
generally want to use renewable energy, and they're realizing, well, that may not be feasible, for a whole other bunch of reasons, but also, as a minerals famine bites into our ability to deploy renewable energy. And I think that's shown Microsoft, who's very aggressive about moving to net zero. Their emissions went up 23% last year when they're driving towards net zero by 2030. So that was
Yeah.
like, whoa, So I think the
How's that
AI
going to
element
happen?
on top of everything else is just another whoa. So how do you get there? And at the end of the day, my last thing is, on this is, we get too focused on emissions reduction to the exclusion of our responsibility when we're governments is to provide affordable, reliable, and accessible energy to every human and every business. And I worry
Yeah.
that the singular focus on just emissions is that we will fail to deliver on that, kind of almost and not only an ambition but a responsibility to society. So
Yeah, so, and that's a great point. So let me ask you this: do you see, and I want to get into mining, and let's unpack some of
yeah,
the myths around it, or
yeah,
the hysteria, if you will, or hypes.
yeah.
But let me ask you this first: do you see the technology or the transition to that technology as the greater hurdle in green fuel, green energy?
Yeah, actually, I think it's a combination. I think it's the pace of change, Michael. So I think a lot of the
Okay.
technologies that we're driving 100 miles an hour to get to, that we're transitioning to,
Yeah.
some of them aren't prime time yet. So we're just
Yeah.
kind of we're putting down mandates and ambitions when really. some of the technologies aren't even ready. So there's this kind of almost suspend rationality and think, oh well, innovation will get us there eventually. And we're seeing that materialize now with So Ford Motor Company, I think it was Ford or GM, was saying, we'll be selling and Mercedes all EVs by 2030, and now they're pulling it back,
Yes.
to like, oh well, 50%,
Yeah.
and now hybrids. So I think this kind of overly ambitious goal setting and mandates set by government are just kind of like they're devoid of reality, and then you
Yeah.
overlay that with consumers aren't buying what you want them to buy. One, two, there's a minerals famine coming around the corner that's going to actually hobble your ability to actually deliver those things. And so you put this all in a thing. We just need to get more practical and more sensible about this whole thing. And
Yeah.
that way
Yeah.
you won't
And people think,
get less resistance. So I think so.
well, you've got to be honest and open and transparent about what is going on and what the reality is, right? And
Absolutely.
and even if we do that, there's going to be so much misconception, because if you do dig through all the hype and read the details, you can get a fair understanding of what is going on.
Yeah.
But the average person in the world, and certainly the average American, doesn't read past maybe two lines after the headline.
Yeah. No.
And that's it. The
Yep.
headline is their news.
Yeah.
That's it. And if so,
That's it.
somebody puts on, "Hey, Finland has the new fuel of the future." That was a headline the other day.
Yeah.
What they don't understand is that they're working on using ammonia as a hydrogen carrier and stuff like that. But they would read that and go, "Well, hey, Finland's figured it out. So, all right, I don't
Yeah.
got to worry about it anymore." And
I
they move
agree.
on, right?
Yeah, no, I agree.
It's not
Yeah.
even close to true.
Yeah, people announce a pilot plant and they think, oh, that's done. And you go, well, no, actually, it uses too much, it's too expensive, too much electricity to produce green hydrogen. There's a whole bunch of
Yes,
things
yes.
that
Or
make
they
it
see a
funky.
thing that says green hydrogen doesn't exist and you can't produce it because this, and this. And they go, oh, well, that'll never work. Well, okay, let's chill out here.
Chill
Somewhere in the
out, yeah.
middle is the truth. We gotta make baby steps to where we're going, right? Let's talk about mining, dude. Should we fill them all up and stop extracting stuff from the earth, as you would read in some places, or what?
No, yeah, that's just not possible. So I think what people don't understand is, as they are actually reading those headlines, Michael, on their iPhone, the iPhone's got over a dozen minerals in it. I mean, everything fundamental to our life is based upon minerals. Steel,
Yeah.
buildings, everything. So that's one. And then two, as we go into the energy transition, is it's fundamentally dependent upon minerals, and copper's the key. So the IEA, the International Energy Group, calls copper the metal of electricity. It's the only metal other than not lithium, but copper spans cars, solar, wind, and battery technology. It's the only metal that spans every single element of the energy trend of the new energy
Okay.
that we're working towards. And then when you look at that, and the process of extracting minerals is really, really difficult. Minerals are where they are, heavily like copper. The main jurisdictions are in Latin America, as you mentioned before, Peru and Chile. Australia's got big resources, Africa. And, they're very deep. A lot of these resources are couple of thousand feet underground. Staggeringly, what they call grade is for every. So we need to produce, right now we produce, to give people, the listeners, an idea, we produce about 24 million tons of copper globally. We need to get to about 45 million tons by 2035, approximately. And
Now, does that now let's clarify that a little bit, Peter? Does that include all of our ambitious goals of AI and everything
no,
else
that
to get
doesn't
to that
actually.
48?
No, that's great, Michael. I don't think those projections, when they were done, actually encapsulated the demand increase in AI. So that might actually push it
Which
up.
is not, it's massive. You were talking about the
Yeah.
energy demands, and I read, I think it was Business Insider or the Cool Down, that when Nvidia delivers
Yeah.
its projected AI servers in 2026, they will be consuming more energy than Denmark and half of the UK.
Oh, possibly. Yeah. No, totally. Yeah. No, it's off the chart. So what we get to is if you take all the existing copper projects that are on the books today and everything that's possible, we're going to have approximately every single year from 2035, somewhere between a 10 to 14 million ton shortage of copper to meet the goals that are set. It's year over year over year. And people go, oh, what does that mean? So for an example would be, well, that shortage is the equivalent of the entire Californian grid times 23. That's every year we
Whew.
can't build that. So, or the whole of the, 22 times the
Wow.
UK. So it's massive.
So when you look at the mining and you look at the needs and you look at the availability of copper,
Yeah.
it, how much specifically in that is can be extracted from recycling? Do we
No.
recycle
So
enough
right now,
copper?
yeah, we do.
Do you know what
We our
percentage we do?
recycling rates are around high 20s to about 30% recycling, and that's probably
Okay, so I mean, there's a significant amount of copper that can be found there, right?
yeah. No, that we're maxed out on the recycling actually right now. There's no increase to be had in recycling. Some and University of Queensland in Australia did a research study that said if we were to close the demand gap with recycling, we'd have to recycle all the copper ever mined. So, which is not going to happen.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
So
not
that
going to
just puts it
happen,
in
is it?
perspective. That kind of puts it in perspective. So we've still got to mind there's still the gap. And you can argue, yeah, maybe recycling can eat into some of that. It's just not going to make the dent necessary. And I think it's, foolish to think, oh, recycling will solve it because that's an excuse to, well, I don't want to deal with mining, so I'll just push that football down the field, right? So that's just not going to work.
Gotcha.
And mining's tough.
Yeah.
It's an energy intensive, it's water intensive. And because it's getting harder and harder, especially copper, but the others, it's pretty waste intensive too. So the industry is working on innovation to change that. But there is, and in the industry, the Western companies at least are very environmentally responsible, work well with indigenous communities. The gap remains though. I mean, it's we still do environmental damage. It's just the nature of the beast. Um,
Yeah, massive
there's
amounts of it.
indigenous communities are increasingly
Can it
changing
be
how
done better
they.
though? Can it be done
No, we've
better,
got
Peter?
way
What is
better.
your
Yeah,
yeah?
yeah, and they meeting,
Okay,
and they've
because
developed environmental standards where they have to operate at a very high level of performance. But there's a way to
yeah.
go. It's not perfect. So
So are we? So you mentioned before, the images of children and pregnant women, et cetera, mining
yeah,
cobalt in the Congo,
yeah,
and then also the leaching of certain things into their fresh water system, fresh water to drink, and you can read all kinds of Armageddon type
yeah,
articles
yeah.
on that. How true is that, and how true was it, and where are we moving forward? Are we grabbing control on anything there that is true?
Yeah, I think on the social things, this is really interesting. So I think for the listeners again, so one is first we need to understand that many countries in Africa and around the world are at different stages of their development cycle. Okay, so I think that's really
Sure.
important. So so they may be where the US was 60, 70 years ago. So that's one. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of poverty. There's a lot of infrastructure shortage. I mean, there's nearly a billion
Yeah.
people, many of them in Africa, that don't have electricity. So with that in mind, there's a thing called artisanal mining versus illegal mining. So artisanal mining is where the only source of income for families, Michael, is to mine. So like we used to have our families working in the fields and agriculture in the 1800s, right? To make
Yeah.
money, they have families working in the mines to chisel out a living. And I've heard ministers from these countries say you can't take that away because as a government we don't have resources to if you took that income away. So there's more effort by the industry to embrace them and ensure they have safe and good practice. And as the country's prosperity moves, then hopefully those people move out of that. That's as distinct from illegal mining, which is really bad, where gangs literally, particularly around gold, cobalt's a problem where there's gangs running mines and I wouldn't say enslaving, but under duress having people mine for them. And it involves
Mm.
children, unfortunately. So I think we need to distinguish between artisanal and illegal. Illegals should be put out. Artisanal mining, we need to work. If we say no to artisanal mining, we need to give governments in the countries the alternative means to provide a living to those people. You can't just, So I think we just need to be more empathetic to the stage of development a country's at. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you make a lot of good points. We demand this, but we want it green, and therefore we can't get it.
yeah,
And we try and demand our own values in our society where we are at today on societies that are nowhere near where we are at
no,
today,
exactly, yeah. So I
and
think
and
there is
can't
a
sustain
path.
that
Yeah.
economic.
Yeah, I think this is a great point, Michael, because
Yeah,
I think there's still a path where we can go to countries, and we'll talk about mining in America too, but we can go to countries and partner with them and ensure with the companies that are partnering with us that the minerals are responsibly extracted and processed, in a way that's
yeah,
meaningful versus, some companies that come from other countries, essentially like have no standards. They just come in and do whatever they want, right? So I think there is an advantage. So I don't think it's we're not advocating, ignore human rights, ignore the environment. Quite the opposite. We can do it in a way, but at the same time be respectful of the needs of a country specifically, and not try and impose American value sets on them immediately. So,
well, and if you try to impose those values, there are other markets out there that will not impose those values
correct,
and gladly purchase the products from those mines. And then
exactly.
you get into all kinds of geopolitical issues and
Yep.
trade issues around the
Yes.
world, right?
Yeah. No, we do. Yeah.
I
The Wall
mean,
Street Journal had the big headline that the U.S. is losing the mineral war to China. So I think I mean, we are in.
well, I mean, we started losing it way back in the '60s, didn't we? When we stopped doing rare earth mining and let them go
Yeah.
do it.
So
I mean,
probably
there's
the real turning point came in the late 80s when we closed our Bureau of Mines, Michael, and also
yeah,
right now we're probably, I would say, the US, other than on a couple of states, but even then we're largely an anti-mining country. We haven't approved a
yeah.
large mine. The current administration is by and large anti-mining, so anything significant they won't approve. So. I mean, we have lots of resources, and we could develop those resources if we wanted to. But we make it so difficult and onerous in most states that it's very difficult to get a large mine approved in the US. And there's this whole thing, I call it the 20-year nightmare, Michael. The people don't believe this is, once I've proven I've got a resource under my feet, it takes me 20 years to permit and develop. 20 years from the time I've proven the resources there. So even if I know I've got a resource like a
Wow.
big copper mine, it's 20 years before I can get it operational. So
Oh my goodness. And it's got to cost an arm and a leg just to get it, to prove it, right? I mean, it's not that
yeah,
easy.
it's not easy. There's it takes years, sometimes decades, to do all the work necessary to prove I've actually got the resource that's worth spending billions developing a mine. So
Now, but here in the US, do we not have knowledge of where those resources are because we shut those down over the years and outsourced those, but there's still
there's still good
minerals
knowledge. Yeah,
and
we've
such.
got good resources, Michael. Yeah, I think we've got there's a lot of good resources. Resolution copper is a good example in Arizona.
Mm,
Where interesting, the prior administration had approved that whole mine, and the new administration within a month pulled all the permits for approval. So that was just a
yeah.
political decision. Notwithstanding that, I think the First Nation tribes, there's an ongoing court case, may or may not have a legitimate issue around the mine, and that's different from the permitting process. But that mine, by the way, could produce 30% of the copper needs of the United States. One mine. So,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
so it's
That
significant.
sounds like a hell of a resource.
It's a hell of a resource. Yeah, it's probably one of the best
Yeah.
resources going in copper around the world right now. So,
Yeah. One topic that I've discussed quite a bit about mining is the fact that old shutdown landfills are mines of the future. How realistic is that? Have you looked into that type of stuff?
no,
Do
it's
you?
interesting. Yeah. So, depending on what commodity, so like a lot of people talk about the rare earth elements, which are not huge in volume, but are necessary key minerals for everything from the defense to everything
Yeah.
electrical. What we find is, they call them waste tailing dams. So where the waste of a mine goes is into a tailings dam. But usually we find those rare earth elements actually quite prevalent inside these tailing dams that we're mining for other resources like copper, because it hasn't been economic to extract that. So they just throw it in a waste dump. So in fact, and we're starting to see technology projects like Rio Tinto develop technology where you go back into the waste dump and extract the minerals that are in there because now it's economic. So that's turning waste. That's
So
kind
it's
of the
the
waste to
waste
value
dumps from
notion.
other mines.
Yeah. So you might
The
be
waste
mining
dumps from,
copper, but but it's not economic to take out because there's rare earth elements in the mine as well.
yeah,
It's not economic
sure.
to extract those as well because that's a whole separate process. So it's just not economic. So
Gotcha.
yeah, it's interesting.
Gotcha.
So waste,
Interesting.
somebody's waste is somebody else's value, right? So
It is. It is. No, you're absolutely right.
no,
You're absolutely right. Yeah. How much does the mineral famine, impending mineral famine, how much does that motivate the Artemis project of NASA to get to Mars and the moon
no,
and set up?
yeah, no. It's an interesting comment. So I think there's a lot of talk around lunar mining.
Yeah.
So the three, so people are going, well, terrestrial mining on Earth. Well, so the things that are kind of gathering a lot of hype. There's lunar mining.
Yeah.
I don't know if that'll ever happen. I mean, there's huge issues, with energy and just getting energy up there to do it. Asteroid mining. There's a great company called Astroforge, which is actually doing a launch on the
Yeah.
SpaceX, attaching itself to asteroids to extract platinum. I think they'll probably do it, but not at the volumes that we expect, that we need. But that's another thing. And then the other one, which is very controversial, is deep sea or undersea mining. So those are
Yeah.
kind of the three things that are getting a lot of noise. And we'll see. So I think there's issues around each of those. Whether it's technological issues, environmental concerns, obviously with deep sea mining. My daughter famously tells
Mm.
me, "Dad, we know more about the moon than we do around under the ocean," so, which is scary when you think about it.
Somebody knows more about the moon than we know about the. I don't.
I don't. Yeah, somebody, not you and I, definitely not. No,
Not me, not us. We don't. Somebody
yeah,
does. We don't.
yeah.
I'm
So,
not
but
sure I
that gets
want
to
to
the
know
point,
what they
Michael, is
know
people
either.
are so like anti-mining. So they're going to almost fantasies. Let's do recycling. That'll solve it. No. Well, let's mine the moon. No, let's mine asteroids. Well, let's mine the ocean. And you go, well, hold on. I mean, personally, I go, wow, you don't want an open mine on land, but you're happy to mine the ocean. I mean, it makes no sense. So,
It doesn't make any sense. But I mean, and I think the anxiety comes from the fact that there's like you said, there's a mineral famine coming,
yeah,
and a lot of that is because of lack of mines.
yes,
But if we open up those mines, how long does that get us to the next mineral famine?
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
you know where we
yeah.
become the war of the worlds on another planet to
Well,
mine
I
their
mean,
minerals.
it's interesting you say war of the worlds
Yeah,
because this has been the history of empires as control of resources, right? So whatever that resource
yeah,
is,
100%.
empires are very, very focused on how you own and dominate the resources of your age that you need to consume. And the most recent one was obviously oil and gas, but now we're getting
Yep.
into this kind of and minerals were much more freely available. But now because they're underpinning a new energy system, they take on a much more strategic kind of nature. And I think, Michael, one thing to point out, there's all these different minerals, and I always categorize there's 5 lenses for each mineral. So, first is I need an adequate, secure, and affordable supply of every mineral. Well, for every mineral, that's going to look different. What is adequate? What does a secure supply chain look like? Right. And then on top of that, I also need to then extract and process those minerals responsibly. So those are actually 5 independent challenges, would you believe, by mineral. Because
Yeah.
every mineral is different because the countries are different, the companies are different, the capital needs are different. So it's complex, it's highly complex, and I think that's one of the challenges is we don't like complexity, so we try and ignore it. So we lump everything into critical minerals, and that's it makes it easy for us.
Yeah, simpler the better, I guess.
Yeah, no. So more,
Well, I mean, the implications are huge. And when we talk about, the war of the worlds, the empires, and all that other kind of thing, is, the weaponization of minerals and raw minerals and resources. I played Risk and I played, Axis and Allies
yeah,
as a kid. And I don't know if anybody out there's played Axis and Allies, but it brought into economic power, right? You went from Risk, which is just rolling your dice, to playing Axis and Allies, which was you had to develop your economic base. Otherwise, you're going to lose
yeah,
that game, that war
yeah.
game, right? It
Well,
depended on actual technology development, stuff like
yeah,
that, which depends on minerals. And that's where I'm getting to is the weaponization of logistics, supply chains, and raw minerals, right?
yeah.
Um, how dangerous is that right
I think it's
now?
coming. Yeah, I
And
think I mean, we're weaponizing chips, right? And chip
yeah,
technology and all that. That's being weaponized. AI is starting to be weaponized. Not sure it's the right way to do stuff, but you can see it in minerals. Nickel's a good example, Michael. So one of the major suppliers of nickel is actually Indonesia. China has invested over $20 billion in the Indonesian nickel industry. Okay, and Indonesia has
mm-hmm.
banned the export of just pure nickel, so they want downstream processing. So China essentially owns the bulk of the Indonesian industry. Less than a year ago, Indonesia started flooding the market with excess nickel supply, which collapsed the price. Okay, and in the
Mm.
process of collapsing the price, two company nickel miners in Australia went bankrupt. Nickel mines that are owned by bigger companies have been shut, put into care and maintenance in Australia. Nickel mines in New Caledonia shut. Okay, so essentially, and the environmental social performance of many nickel mines in Indonesia is questionable. I mean, they dump a lot of their waste in the ocean still. There's rainforest deforestation going on. There's questionable impacts on the indigenous people around these nickel mines. Okay, so all that. So what you may end up with is the Indonesian nickel industry with its interesting environmental social performance dominating nickel supply globally, owned by the Chinese. Okay, and then there was a big call, interestingly. Well, nickel mined and processed in Australia is arguably better environmentally and socially, so there should be a green premium for nickel, right, produced in Australia. Well, the market said no. The London Metal Exchange said we're not doing a green premium. Car companies, well, we're not paying a green premium. So Indonesian nickel, questionable environmental social performance, is increasingly gaining the market share, and we're not sure how that's going to play out. But that's a good example of one country dominating a particular commodity and driving the market in a certain way. Environmental social performance of those mines. What's more important, the ESG performance or the price of the commodity at the end of the day? So it's an interesting thing that's kind of playing out in front of us right now. So you go, and then Indonesia, countries like the way mining's done in Indonesia, that just helps reinforce negative impressions in the West of mining. So and then we apply those thoughts to every single mine, whether that's a Western mining company that's doing much better versus other mining countries that have questionable practice. So.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have to adopt those questionable practices.
No, we don't.
In order to do it.
Yeah.
And isn't it that? I mean, the premium on green is part of that's a huge part of the barrier, right? I mean, in all of it, how much is that is perception and just putting that premium, and how much is it a cost factor that it's cheaper to do it without morals?
Well, yeah, well, that's
ethos.
That's provocative. Yeah. So I don't believe in for when you get to mass market adoption. So well, actually, one back. I think and I like looking at clothing industry, plastics is the great challenge to goods. Whatever it is that's produced at the highest level of standard is how do you achieve low cost without massive scale? Because it just takes time to scale using these practices. Because wherever we see good practice, we see high cost. And that, people just, there's a segment of society that'll buy expensive cars, expensive groceries, but that's not the bulk of the population. That's, if you're lucky, 5% of the people. So how do we break that nexus? So my view in mining, Michael, is that at some point, and I don't know when this is, first, I don't believe there'll ever be a premium. But I think once a volume of supply of a specific commodity is produced in a certain way, with high environmental, social standards at a percentage of global supply, that then becomes the market price. And if you're not produced that way, then you get discounted, right? So it's just the market working. So at some point, the stuff that's produced in a good way, it becomes the market. I don't know when that is. Is that 1 year?
So are you implying that? Are you implying that penalties for not or subsidies to use it to grow that market is part of the answer to get it to be mass adopted? Should there be, or do you advocate for that?
I don't think subsidies and tariffs. I'm not a big believer of those. I think they're kind of blunt instruments. They don't encourage companies to invest really. I mean, right now companies are not inclined to invest in big new mines. It's just not because they look at the slowdown of EV sales, etc., and they go, "Why should I invest billions building up supply capacity to meet some forecasted demand, which may or may not happen?" Right? I mean, I don't know. And the thing you got to realize, Michael, when I build a mine, it can last 50, 60 years. So why would I build something for peak demand when that peak demand only lasts for a fraction of the life of the mine that I'm developing. So that's not going to. I
Oh,
mean,
that's
just
a
like the
great
economics
point.
don't work. They just don't make sense.
Yeah,
So
they
they
don't
don't
make
make
sense.
sense.
So
So
is the
demand has to
is
flatten, right? Demand has to flatten out.
yeah, it does. You're exactly right. Is there a direction we should be going, or are we going in that direction? It just has to work itself out. It seems like you're very much let the markets work and do the
Yeah.
best we can, and we'll figure this out. Is that what I'm gathering, or
Yeah,
what's
I
your
think so.
thoughts?
Yeah, I think the government has a role, to fund innovation and help spur innovation in the areas that's needed and create environments where things can thrive. Because I think the mandates are starting to show up as being they just drive irrational behavior and do misallocation of capital. So so all these
I
mandates.
agree with that.
I mean, I just totally it's incredulous that California goes, well, you can't sell, you got to sell all EVs in California by 2035. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, there's no way that's going to be met. And then also, and we're
Well,
keeping
there's no way they
affordable.
can support it. I mean,
No,
eh,
so so
when
it
you
creates
hear that, and then
irrational
you hear about
behavior.
rolling brownouts, et cetera, you got to say there's no way they can be serious about that.
No,
How can you
exactly. Yeah.
look at that and understand your own power grid right now and then say that?
No, exactly. So that's what you see. So when you let the market work a bit, we see the market working. Now the car companies are finally responding. More hybrids because people will buy hybrids. Less EVs till you can figure out how to make an affordable one because you can't. We're not going to let the Chinese in. The only people making affordable EVs. Toyota has a more of a multi-model strategy. All of the above, not just EVs, and it could be their strategies actually playing out as being the smart one. You know,
It is right now for
yeah,
sure. It seems to
totally
be the
smart.
right one
Yeah,
now. Yeah.
and I think at the end of the day, there's no human being. There's very few human beings. I shouldn't say none, but there's very few human beings that go, "I want to make the planet a worse place to live in 10 years than it is now." So I think
Yeah.
we have to clean up our energy system. We have to clean up the transportation sector and these other sectors, but we need to let the markets work. The government needs to talk to industry more. Activists have a role to play, but they can't be the sole voice in the room, and I worry they have been to this point.
Yeah.
And so I think, yep,
Well,
we'll
I
get
mean,
there.
the initial reaction to those that could make the biggest difference in the industry and in the market players, the big companies, et cetera, appear to immediately discount the ESG issues, especially environmental and stuff like that,
Yeah,
right? To move forward, they're protecting shareholder value and
yeah,
so on and so forth, and I get that, but behind the rooms, they have a fiduciary responsibility to take it all seriously, right?
absolutely.
Because
Yeah,
they
yeah.
have to. But it's that public facing that they have to put on for their shareholders, et cetera, that seems to be detrimental to everybody understanding what the real issues are and where people are
No,
trying to get
totally,
to.
yeah. And
And
I'll tell you,
and and
in mining station, I think one of the biggest, I'm very sad, one of the biggest disappointments, I think, has been this kind of obsession with the term ESG. And it's
yeah,
become so, and it creates, it's a bit like climate change. You get half the rooms against half's for. But what it has done is cloud the key environmental social issues companies are addressing. For mining companies,
yes,
Michael, we have a term, social license to operate. This is not an option for them to get their social. Forget what the law says in any country. For them to get their social license to operate, an agreement from the communities, etc., they have to operate at the highest environmental and social standards. They really do. Otherwise, they're just not going to get that social license to operate, as we call it. So it's an and. So I need to be actually good on financial performance, but financial performance is achieved by having world class environmental and social performance because the cost of not getting that right. One CEO said, if you don't get that stuff right, it can add 40% to your capital cost of developing a mine and 40% to your operational cost. So even if you just look at it through financial lens, it just makes sense, right? So
yeah.
yeah,
Again, I'm having a conversation, and what I'm discovering is that those that look at the principles of ESG, right? And
yeah,
I know it's becoming this cliche, et cetera, ESG, but the principles of sustainability across all those areas are good, sound business sense, right? From
totally.
acceptance to
Yeah,
operational and operating with the least amount of waste in the greatest amount of efficiency and
Yeah,
cost and raw
absolutely.
minerals, et cetera, right? It just is good business sense.
Yep. Yeah, totally. Yeah, so like for the
Yeah,
mining industry, for example, it's trying, it's working really hard to electrify its operations and move away from, essentially, diesel has been one of the backbones of mining, and we all know that
sure.
diesel's not a great fuel to be using because of carcinogenics and pollution. So the
Yep.
electrification of everything that uses diesel is a very big focus of the industry, and I think, my view is emissions is one aspect of that, but the one, to me, it's the impact locally of, mass or diesel fumes that is the more positive contributor. So, so things like that, I think, positive. When you look at the Western mining companies, that's the kind of positive movement that we're seeing.
Yeah. So, you mentioned this desire and this effort to try and electrify as much as possible on your energy side, and it does obviously involves the mining side because you're
Yeah,
mining for minerals for energy, right?
yeah,
Whether for electric or I guess it's all electric energy when it comes down to it, unless you're going to burn hydrogen or ammonia in your pistons and your combustion chambers. But
sure.
what is in your mind? What is the fuel of the future? Where's the energy at? Is it? I mean, hydrogen's the most abundant mineral in the world,
Yeah,
or in element in the universe, the known universe, anyways.
yeah.
I can't tell you what's under the mesa up there in Skinwalker
Yeah.
Ranch,
But
but
I think it's I think we have to go all of the above. So I'm not I'm a
yeah,
if we're to eradicate emissions, we can't be wed to just solar and wind because that's wedding yourself to a technology, not concerned about emissions. So I think we need nuclear. I think small modular. I think one of the benefits of AI, by the way, Michael, is it may accelerate the approvals and massive adoption of small modular reactors.
yeah,
I think that's
yeah.
that
No,
could be.
make no mistake. I'm not
No,
against
no,
the
no. You're not
positive
advocating it.
impacts
Yeah,
of
yeah,
AI.
yeah.
Yeah, no,
And then there's that,
it's
and then
just
I
it's
think
got its
hydrogen.
limitations in its work.
Yeah, and I
It's
think
much like
hydrogen.
blockchain.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
go
And I
ahead.
think with hydrogen, the bigger issue is transportation of hydrogen. So I think at some point we'll be
Oh
able to
yeah,
produce it economically, but it has to be produced and consumed pretty close to itself. I think massive, transportation of hydrogen through pipelines is just so difficult, and not economic. So
yeah. The transportation, the storage, and the dispensing of those
yes,
are three huge things, and those are the
huge things.
difficult downfalls of it. Yeah,
Don't yeah.
massive. So when you talk, if you looked into, you know, like seriously, the a Finnish company looking at utilizing ammonia as the carrier of hydrogen, which is its
Yes.
main ingredient. Um,
Yeah.
that kind of makes sense to me. No, I mean the
No, it
infrastructure is
does.
there.
Yeah,
Ammonia is
but
shipped
I
all
still
over the
think
world now, anyway.
yeah, I don't think it's economic. I don't think the economics work out good enough. So I know the Saudi Arabians have one of the biggest hydrogen projects in the world. I think they're using ammonia as the transportation mechanism. The economics just aren't don't work yet, Michael. Maybe they do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think hydrogen, and obviously then there's fusion, which is out there. As they say, the energy of the future and
It's the
always will
energy of the
be.
future.
Yes, energy of the future and always will be. So that's
Yeah.
exciting. Yep. So I think we just need to be more, being pragmatic. I'm a pragmatic, ambitious pragmatist. I think you can be pragmatic and ambitious at the same time, because I think if you just
I think
get
it's
too
what we need.
ambitious, you just get unrealistic about what you're trying to get to. So
No, I think ambitious pragmatics are what is needed.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I
Yeah,
think,
totally.
yeah, I think it is. We'll call this the ambitious pragmatic. Uh, Peter Bryant is the name
Yeah,
of
thank you.
this show.
Thank you, Michael.
I love it. I had Doug Woodring from the Ocean Recovery Alliance out of Hong Kong on, and I called him an activist. And he said, "No. I'm an actionist.
Actionist. I love it.
Activists just complain. Actionists get things done."
I love it.
Uh, a very pragmatic guy, really, really excellent guy. And I appreciate that type of thing. I appreciate you, Peter, and what you're doing there, and I appreciate you being on the show, my friend. Where should people go to learn more about and things that you want to evangelize about energy and mining? Where do they need to go?
That's great. So, it's a great question. There isn't actually a place to go on the web. I would, obviously, it's pretty fragmented. Actually, the sources of information. It's a great point. I mean, Google it. Don't just get fixated on all the bad stories. Just educate yourself. There's a couple of great books that have recently come out. the war underground, something like that. I'll send it to you. But yeah, I think you just got to Google and educate yourself around the minerals. We've produced a 4-page document called Key Minerals at a Glance that helps, it's highly visual, that helps educate people. So people can email me if they want that. But yeah, so I think just got to be open. I think you have to be open-minded about this topic.
You have to, and I would say you need to be pragmatic about it, like you said, and you need to understand that there really are two sides to every story.
Correct.
And headlines aren't the answer. And if you haven't heard both sides, you really can't make a judgment, but you should try and educate yourself on both sides, right? I mean,
you did, yeah.
The information that you shared about why certain mining situations are the way they are in certain communities or societies is something nobody ever thinks about. They just think that this industry is over there enslaving women and children.
Yes, totally.
And it's not the case. If you stop that, you kill whole societies and economies.
Exactly, yeah, and put families to poverty. So no, I think it's important. And I think, Michael, you mentioned something right at the beginning about curiosity and your curiosity. I think people need to be way more curious and, open-minded when they're kind of in the pursuit of more knowledge, so you can start forming opinions. But curiosity is the key to this as well.
The punk invasion from the UK got me.
No, I think a lot of people, at least got you in a positive way. That's good.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, for a long time there, it wasn't so positive, but the positive thing is that understanding as much about issues as I can, and understanding that not everybody is telling you the truth. They have their agendas.
Yeah.
And weaving through those agendas is incredibly important, and you need to be savvy about that.
So my dad was a journalist, and he always said to me, Peter, before you form an opinion around any topic, you need to read 3 points of view around it from different perspectives, and only then may you be getting to somewhere approaching the truth, but not the entire truth. So that's wisdom I've kept. So.
No. 100%. And unfortunately, even people who do that only read things to prove their already preconceived
ideas. That's why those 3 different perspectives is important. So confirmation, it gets rid of confirmation bias. Yep.
Yeah, it certainly is. Peter, thank you so much, my friend. I hope you have a wonderful day, and let's get out there and make this transition happen. Hey,
absolutely, Michael. Thank you for having me. It was a really enjoyable discussion. I hope the listeners find it insightful and have learned at least one thing from it.
I hope so as well. And hey, man, peace and love, my friend, and thanks everybody for tuning in and downloading the Sustainiacs. Peace.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Cheers.